Neill, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Matt. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, I've been looking forward to speaking to you, actually, because, I first came across 17 Sport and subsequently your book and your podcast when I was doing some research about 18 months ago, trying to find any existing links between conscious capitalism and sport. And your book, Legacy Sport, which I would highly recommend, and I'll put a link in the program notes. It's full of information and inspiration in the form of first-hand accounts and case studies from organisations and individuals doing good while doing well, as you put it. And bringing that purpose revolution from business to life. And it includes some of the standard bearers, if you like, of the conscious capitalism movement, like Unilever, and some standout examples of purpose-driven sports series like Formula E and the Ocean Race. There's also, over only 5 or 6 pages, Neill, your own personal story and a particular moment for you where capitalism, sport and consciousness came together when you left Octagon and took a career break. Can you tell us more about that moment and what happened for you around that time?
Sure. I think it all came together in a moment, but I think there was a number of things leading up to that moment that culminated in me deciding to do what I do. I was born in Africa and grew up and experienced firsthand the poverty in Africa, but also the power of sport. And I was very fortunate to live through the transition from white power to black power in South Africa. And I don't know whether you saw or have seen the movie Invictus.
Yeah.
The story of Rugby World Cup and how Nelson Mandela used the power of rugby to heal a divided nation. For me, that was certainly one moment where I kind of took a step back and asked myself the question, is sport playing to its full superpower the way that it's currently constructed? Because that was the exception rather than the norm. You know, how Nelson Mandela grasped that opportunity to drive a social agenda. But it also gave me confidence to start trying things differently in the world of sponsorship. And so back in South Africa in the sort of second half of the 90s, we started using every sponsorship that we did, we'd used as an opportunity to drive some kind of what we called a development component. And that was really to try and use the event or the sporting activity as a platform to trying to help to address some of the imbalances from the past. So, you know, black people in South Africa were denied things like access to education, healthcare, kind of things that you and I would take for granted. But for the majority of the population, they didn't have access to those things. So we always try to find a way to use sport and sponsorship as a way of providing that access. And what we learned was that when we did that, the sponsorships outperformed the traditional ones. Surprise, surprise. You know, it's possible to do good while you do well. And so that was really the beginning of it all. And then when I moved to Octagon to take on the role of president of Octagon Europe, Middle East, Africa, to be honest, I just found that the European market wasn't ready for that conversation. They were still very fixated on the traditional approach to sponsorship. You know, sponsorship as an awareness builder, sponsorship as a way to drive engagement with the fans, to enhance the fans' experience around their passions. Still the kind of language you hear today in many agencies in the world. And that kind of gave me the confidence, I guess, to realize, well, maybe it's time I'm not going to get done what I want to get done in this space. Time for me to move on and go and do my next thing. So that was the kind of moment where I transitioned from the traditional world of sports marketing to what I do now, which I kind of describe as purpose-led sports marketing. And it's really just about, you know, at the end of the day, I think recognizing sport's real superpower, which is to be used as a platform to make the world a better place. And something that I don't think enough sports practitioners understand, have grasped, embrace, take advantage of.
And how's the journey been since then, Neill? I mean, you said that the European market in particular wasn't quite ready to make that transition at that time. What does the field look like now?
Yeah, so, you know, between now and then, so that's scary thought, but it's 15 years. When I first started, so after I left Octagon, I took a year off, had a lot of time to think about how I wanted to do what I was going to do next. The first thing I decided to do was just to get out there and start talking to people. And I spoke to brands, properties, people involved, nonprofits involved in the space. And what I learned was that people were interested in this idea that, you know, it's possible to do good while you do well in sponsorship or in sport. but nobody was really ready to embrace or to change the way that they operate. And I think the reason for that is, I mean, we've all heard the term the innovator's dilemma. When things are good, there's no impetus to change. And sports had it good for a long time, right? So still today, the prevailing business model in sport is very profit orientated. And it's work. There's like a template that everybody uses. Everybody goes to school to learn how to do traditional sports marketing, and you go and work for a property or brand and you do traditional sports marketing, and it works. And so there hasn't been much impetus to change. But I got the opportunity to work on 3 projects that I think, what I recognize is that I needed some case studies to be able to show people that this stuff works. And I can't believe I was so naive, but when I look back on it now, when I first started talking to people about this message, the message was, this is the right thing to do. And that wasn't strong enough, right? When the penny dropped for me that you need to show people how this is good for business, or this is good for their bottom line, when I realized that, and I started to change the narrative, that's when people started to pay attention. So I got to work on some interesting projects, the 34th America's Cup in San Francisco, which we led as a purpose-led event, and set a whole lot of firsts for America's Cup. Very commercially successful, the most sustainable America's Cup. In fact, major international sporting event ever at that time. We were carbon neutral and zero waste. First major international event to achieve that. And on the back of that, we built a whole story around, a narrative around how this race would serve as a platform to address ocean health. And not only raise awareness amongst the public around the state of the oceans and why they need help, but also to drive actions connected to actually addressing ocean health. So that's a really important insight, is that this is not just about telling stories, it's about doing stories. The best programs are those that do both of those 2 things. So that was a great success. And also very commercial, as I think I said, a very, very successful commercial program. I then got to work on a project called the One Will Play project. An inventor by the name of Tim Jarnagin was inspired to make it possible for every kid in the world to play with a real football or soccer ball, because he'd seen kids in Africa playing with a Coke can and a rock, and it touched him deeply. And he learned that the reason that kids play with those kind of things is because, one, they can't afford a real football. And even if they can, footballs from the Western world don't last very long in third world environments because they're not designed to do that. So Tim decided to invent the world's first almost indestructible soccer ball, football. Never goes flat, doesn't need a pump, and as a consequence of that can survive the harshest conditions. And so I helped Tim to bring that idea to market, and we put a big partnership together with Manchester United and with Chevrolet that made it possible for 30 million kids around the world to play with a real football, which was amazing. And again, this concept, it was good for Chevrolet, it was good for Man United, it was good for the community, and it was also good for Tim because he now had a viable business, which actually was a B Corporation built on the back of all of this. Then I got to work on Super Bowl as chair of the Sustainability Committee, and we developed a strategy for that event, which was built around a purpose of using the event as a platform to improve the lives of young people. A third of the population in the Bay Area live in poverty. Can you believe it? The headquarters of Google, Facebook, Apple, all these, basically the heartbeat of the world's technology industry, yet 1/3 of the population live in poverty. So we decided to use the event as a platform to address that problem, and it worked. And still today, that was in 2016, and 5-6 years later, it's still the most sustainable, the most giving, the most commercially successful, the most engaging Super Bowl ever. And I maintain because we led with purpose. That's what differentiated us from other Super Bowls, and why we got the support of the local community. So that's a long way of answering your question, but to get us to where we are today, armed with those 3 case studies, I'm finding that people are a lot more receptive to the message and a lot more interested. But I think, Matt, the thing that really made the difference was COVID, because COVID was, I think, a wake-up call for the sports industry. And I don't know if you remember back to the times when the NBA announced that they were closing their season down, and government started to declare that sport is not considered an essential service, and therefore sport will be shut down. And a whole bunch of people running sport went, holy crap, how can we not be an essential service? Because we thought we were, because we're providing all this great entertainment for people. But no, you're not an essential service because you actually don't matter. When times get tough, you don't matter. And so that I think was the real tipping point in terms of getting a bigger chunk of the sports sector to start realizing that there's a different way to go about doing business in sport and to using sport to its true potential and embracing, as the term you use, a more conscious approach to how they operate capitalistically within the environment of sport. So I've seen it. So we've seen it. So we've seen a shift change since COVID, and it's on an upward trajectory right now, which is great. Timing's everything, right?
Well, that is great because it wasn't always clear or certain that would be the case. In fact, I remember in your book, which was written during COVID, right? And you were kind of cautiously optimistic that this would be a turning point. But I think many people's experience, or certainly mine, in a post-COVID world, is that for many people there has been a shift to a more individualist, independent kind of state of mind. You know, some people are using it as an opportunity to be more conscious and more caring and look after others. Actually, some others are thinking, well, actually, I'm just going to look after myself here, because they've realized that there are systems in place that are not going to protect and look after them. So I just wonder, on a bigger level, certainly in terms of sport, is that really being embraced in the right way? What's your experience been so far now?
Yeah, it's complicated, isn't it? It's very complex. I mean, what you're talking about has been the status quo in the US for the last 30 years, right? Very individualistic society. I think Europe is less. I think culturally is less individualistic than the US, and I think that's why I've actually moved from San Francisco to Paris. I now live in Paris, and the reason that I did that was because we were finding that the conversations we were having in Europe were at a much more advanced level than they are in the US. The US is still we find very, and there are obviously exceptions, right? And I'm generalizing here. The US is still very transactional in its approach. It's very CSR. It's very whatever's required at the moment to keep things going, kind of thing. Whereas I think there's an greater inbred sense of community in Europe, which lends itself to that, and we're certainly starting to see that play out. But back to your question of why is this relevant to sport? Because at the end of the day, there are a couple of drivers here. The first is, and in no particular order, the first is that I think the fans really care about this stuff. And I think all the research that we're seeing is showing that, particularly the younger audiences, they expect organizations to stand up for something more than just profits. They want them to take a position. They want them to solve problems. They want them to contribute to basically filling in the gap for government to a large extent. And so those organizations that are stepping up and doing that are seeing the benefits of it, right? And we've both seen the research that supports that. Yeah. So if you're a brand and you want to remain relevant to your customers, what do? You do what your customers want you to do, right? Because if you go in a different direction, then you're going to alienate yourself from your customers. And I'm oversimplifying it, but that at the end of the day I think is a truth. So why do brands sponsor sport? Because it's about positive association. It's about access to audience. It's about being able to tell positive stories. So that's why brands are starting now to reconsider the types of properties that they invest in, because they want to be able to use sport for its superpower, not for something else. And so the properties that are embracing this are the ones that are getting the most attraction and the most interest from sponsors. That's certainly what we're seeing. And the ones that aren't are the ones that are starting to fall out of favor. And so we've done a number of assignments over the last 3 years where brands have said to us, please help us to reevaluate our sponsorship portfolio, not based on their reach or on their audience profile, which is the normal stuff, but on their fit from a purpose perspective. So how do these properties and brands, in terms of what they're doing and how they're behaving and how they're acting, how do they support the narrative around how we're trying to position our brand and how we're acting as an organization, which is really interesting, right?
Yeah.
So that's happening. So the fans are driving that.
Well, that's great, and that helps the business case, right? But in terms of establishing that purpose, for something like the Ocean Race or Formula E, the purpose is clear. The message is around sustainability. How about other organisations that don't have an intrinsic established purpose necessarily, or maybe they do, but they've lost sight of it? What role can we play in bringing them back?
They just need to figure out what it is, and every organization can have a purpose. I mean, it doesn't have to be, you say Formula E, it's kind of more a natural fit, right? Because it's about transition to renewable future and mobility and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of fits and makes sense. With the Ocean Race, it's, again, like with America's Cup, Ocean Race did exactly what we did at America's Cup. They focused on ocean health and used that as a rallying call and a point of difference. But I believe every single sports organization has some relevance in society, and it just needs to figure out what that is and then double down on trying to use its influence, resources, platform to address that issue. So if you're a football club and you're in a community where there's a problem with knife crime, and you're called Arsenal and your sponsor and your partner is Adidas, then you develop an initiative called No More Red, and it's all around reducing the incidence of knife crime in that community. That's just one example, right, of how you can use. What's the connection between football and knife crime? There isn't an obvious one, right? But the connection comes from the place where that club lives and operates, and the community that it's a part of. Yep. And every community has issues, right? So whether you're a football club or a cricket club or a rugby club or a chess club, you're of the community. Otherwise, you wouldn't exist.
Yep.
Figure out what's the problem in the community that you can solve, and become more than just an entertainment platform. Become actually a platform that's a contributor towards solving the problems in your community.
Yeah.
And for some people, the community is global. For others, it's a local town. It doesn't matter, I believe.
Yeah, and football's an interesting case study in that respect, isn't it? Because these community football clubs, like in the town where I live in Huddersfield, they existed to serve the communities, right? That is their purpose.
That's why they started.
That was their original purpose. Yeah, indeed.
Exactly.
And that can be done in lots of different ways. Globally, though, I look at football at the minute, Neill, and I'm a big fan of football. And you have something like the Women's World Cup that just took place now, which was such a huge success globally, with a great message. And then you see Neymar taking a private Boeing 747 to Saudi Arabia, and it's a little depressing as well. As a global product, it can be a little disheartening as a fan who does believe in these. The power of the game for change and what it really should be standing for,
Matt, it's just a reflection of society, right?
Yeah.
The society, unfortunately, only 20% of society really cares about this stuff. Maybe 50% at a shove. But there's still a lot of organizations, a lot of people who don't believe in climate change. They don't. So that's the reality that we're dealing with, right? So what do? You throw your arms up and give up and get depressed about it, or you try and take action, and you try to use the influence that you have and to collaborate with others who share that same point of view, to make a point and to show that there is a different way. And so that's the approach that we take. I mean, our name 17 Sport relates back to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
And Goal 17 is about partnerships. Because we are huge believers in the power of collaboration and partnerships, because really these problems are too big to solve for any one organization to solve. We need to come together collectively to solve them. And so let's bring the people who have the same intent, who have the same level of consciousness, okay, I mean, to put it bluntly, who have that same level of consciousness, that understand the issues and understand the power of sport to play a role in contributing towards building a better future and a better world. And hopefully more and more of us will start doing that, and after a while it'll become normal. It's going to take time.
So how do you go about doing that with 17 Sport? I know along with Fabien Paget, your partner in this, there are some individual athlete collaborations that take place, such as with, I think it's Serena Williams.
Yeah. So Fabien, before Fabien and I joined forces about almost 4 years ago, Fabien had his own sports marketing business that was focused on talent representation.
Yep.
And Fabien has for a long time believed in the power of the athlete voice to drive social and environmental change. And he got to practice that with the biggest athlete in the world, Serena Williams, which is great. Fabien was part of the team that managed her and was responsible for her non-tennis brand, helping to develop her non-tennis brand, particularly outside of North America. So all the stuff around women's empowerment and gender equity that we know Serena Williams stands for.
Yeah.
And was able to put together some partnerships with the likes of AXA and a core group, who partnered with Serena not because she was the world's number one women's tennis player, but because she was an advocate for gender equity and for women's rights. The fact that she was the number one tennis player in the world was great, okay, because it gave her the reach and the podium to be able to spread her message. And so, yeah, so part of what we do at 17 Sport is we, drawing on that experience, is we have a very small portfolio of athletes that we manage, and the starting point is always to try and help them to refine their purpose, to help them to be clear on what it is that they want to fix, they want to help fix, partner them with organizations that are aligned, and then help them to execute against that. But it's only a part of what we do. It's the bulk of our business is really around working with brands and properties.
Yeah.
Again, because we think we can get bigger scale, achieve greater impact at that level.
Yeah, although I guess when you get an athlete with the impacts of someone like Serena Williams, you're able to do it at that bigger level. And I'm interested to know, Neill, about this. We talked before briefly about individualism, which is a massive element of being a top athlete, right? Is doing everything you can to make sure that you operate at your best and not really need to think beyond that. How is that transition, or how important is that transition, and how difficult is it to help an athlete make that transition? Because ultimately, if that's all they care about, if all Neymar cares about is playing football and making money, then why would he care about getting on a Boeing 747, right? But fundamentally, all athletes share this kind of individualist kind of drive as a primary instinct, right?
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? So one, I would challenge whether athletes are all individually driven. If you're if you're part of a team, there's a team ethos that's very important. So yes, you're an individual within that team, but there's a team. Successful teams are not made up of individuals, I don't believe. Maybe I'm wrong on that point. We can discuss that over beer. And even I was actually chatting to a track and field athlete yesterday. She's a 200-meter runner, and she said, although I participate in an individual discipline, I'm actually part of a team. And I need that team around me to be successful. So when I'm on the starting blocks and I'm, for my 21 seconds or whatever, doing my 200 meters, yes, I'm on my own. But for everything else around it, I'm part of a team. I'm part of a team in my training. I'm part of my team in my when I go to competitions with the rest of the club or the team that I'm representing. So anyway, so I think athletes, yes, they are individuals, but they're also part of a team. And why I bring that up is that I think that team has a great influence over how an athlete behaves. So I think those teams around athletes have a huge role to play in terms of helping athletes to understand the potential they have to contribute towards driving change. But the second thing is that I think that what we find anyway is that purpose is a very much a kind of intrinsic thing. We kind of look at purpose on a continuum. On the one end you have philanthropy, and on the other end you have purpose. And the extent to which you integrate doing good into your everyday life, if you're an individual, or into your everyday actions if you're a company, determines how purposeful you are. And those individuals you use the word consciousness. It's kind of like what's your level of progress from a consciousness level? And some individuals are more advanced than others. It's just reality. It doesn't matter whether they're athletes or doctors or teachers. Everybody's at a different place in that journey. So what's important is to find those athletes that are at the right place in their journey, that they are searching for something new, something different, and are ready to onboard this different mindset and this different approach. You can't force them to do it. For this to work, it has to come from within.
Yeah,
is our belief. Whether you're an athlete or if you're a company, your leadership, your CEO, your chairman, your chairperson, they need to be ready to take the company on that journey. If they're not, it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
And so that's a key insight. So one of the first things we always do is we try and gauge where does this person, where does this individual, where does this organization sit in terms of their level of commitment to wanting to use their platform to drive the kind of change they want to see happen. If they're ready, then we find we can help them. And it's just about providing structure at the end of the day. There's often a lot of education required. Athletes, we can't assume that every athlete is an expert on environmental matters or on social matters, just like most people aren't. So there's a big education piece up front to expose them to what are the issues so that they can, through that process, try and identify what resonates with them. And often there's some personal connection. There's something that happened in their family or some experience that they've had that took them to a place where they're interested in something. And then once you've done that, we use a thing called design thinking. So it's just a process to guide people through a process of identifying what it is that matters to them, so that the outcome of which can be us developing a strategy for them. And then once we develop that strategy, we put the partnerships in place, because again, it's not about them on their own. Who are the non-profits that they're going to partner with? Who are the brands they're going to partner with? We put that ecosystem of partners together. And then once we've done that, we execute against that and help them to tell their story through those and with those partners, and to be involved in doing programs with those partners. So that's kind of the process that it goes through. But so as to your example earlier of top world footballer taking a jet to go somewhere, yeah. I mean, I'll tell you an interesting story. When I was at Super Bowl, we wanted to build an athlete program for our environmental program, and we did a study of every single NFL player, and we couldn't find one. This is back in 2016. We couldn't find one NFL player that we could authentically put on a platform to represent us.
Wow.
To talk about the topic. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
And the environmental stuff's more complicated than the social stuff. I think you'll find generally there are a lot more athletes care and are involved in social issues than environmental issues. And it's interesting. It's an interesting dynamic. It's probably also a reflection of society.
And of course,
but people change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's hope so. I mean, and also, like you said, it's a reflection of society on a macro level, but also individuals too. I picked a bad example in terms of Neymar, and there are plenty of good ones too. And like you said, I fully subscribe to that idea of team players as well. It's not,
and but it's interesting because it's not one or the other, right? So I mean, take someone like Mbappe. So Mbappe got very heavily criticized, or him and the team, because they took a flight to play a game instead of taking the train. And in the press conference, I don't know if you remember this instance, with the press conference where him and the manager were. Of PSG were questioned on this topic, they started laughing and made some joke about something that was very demonstrated a lack of sensitivity to the issue.
Yeah.
6 months later, he's now standing up and starting to take a position on social things, which is progress, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think he's also growing up. He's a young kid. I mean, how old is he? 22 or something?
Yeah,
isn't he?
yeah.
He's a young kid. Imagine when I was 22, I wasn't really too keyed into all this stuff.
No.
So huge pressure on these young athletes to play this role in society. And so, he's learning, he's becoming wiser. And if I make a prediction, in 5 years' time, he'll be a major global advocate for making the world a better place through football. I really think he will.
Yeah.
You look at his family background and where he comes from, when he's ready, he'll do it.
Yeah.
But he's got to go on his own journey between now and then to get there.
Well, that's something for us optimists to look forward to. What about the present, Neill? In your experience, it might be difficult for you to kind of put exact kind of figures or percentages around this, but generally speaking, what is the disposition of current sports leaders that you speak to within organisations, from a commercial side, but also from a sporting side, perhaps, to engage with purpose and to take this message on,
Yeah. So I don't know the answer to that question as far as properties are concerned. I don't have any hard statistical data to give you. What I can tell you anecdotally from the conversations that we have is that, and this is across the board, there are more and more leaders of sports properties who are starting to interrogate the space and starting to ask questions around what could we do differently, do better in order to remain relevant. And why? Because their sponsors are asking them to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. What I can tell you is that from a brand perspective, there's a high level of interest. We commissioned our own survey about 6 months ago called the Sport and Purpose Survey. We spoke to 100 of the world's leading marketers and asked them this very question. And the two key questions were, to what extent do you believe that purpose is important? And the others, what role do you think that sport can play in helping you to bring your purpose to life and to tell your purpose story? And in both cases, the responses were plus 70% of that audience felt it was important.
Wow.
So that's where the disconnect is now. You've got, I would hazard a guess that it's probably 30%, 20 to 30% of the sports properties are actually doing something about this stuff. 70% of the brands want it. You can see the delta there.
Yeah.
So that delta is going to drive the change. That delta is going to change properties to behave differently. Otherwise, they're going to have to find a new source of revenue. In some cases, the better properties can just replace that sponsor with another one, because there's still a lot of sponsors who don't care about purpose.
Yeah.
So it's less of an issue. There's less pressure. But for the more fragile properties, it's more of an issue. And so I think the change will start to happen more at the kind of marginal properties than it will at the big ones. It's difficult for FIFA to change direction, right?
Yeah.
For all sorts of reasons, the politics, the inertia, the personalities, the baggage. It's really difficult. It's a big ship. It's like turning an oil tanker around. It's a lot easier for a smaller organization. It's more nimble, like Formula E, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easier for Formula E than Formula One to do this, because there's no history. There's no Bernie Ecclestone in your history that didn't care about this stuff.
Yeah.
So you can reinvent from day one. But it'll change. And having said that, there are some big properties, some of the biggest in the world, that have identified this and are acting against it. And so change is happening.
Yeah.
Change is definitely happening. Yeah.
Yeah. The other opportunity I see here, Neill, kind of looking forward as this change happens, is the development of individuals to have the capacity to cope with and advance this change. I know there's some research from the world of business, and I'll post a link or an article in the program notes to this around the gap between the complexity of the challenges faced in modern business and the mental capacity of leaders within it to cope. Is that something that rings true to you in this space as well, in sport?
100%. I think the truth is that most of the people running sport are probably there first because they love sport, and it was an opportunity for them to follow a career in something they're passionate about, or they just went into sport because of the lure of big money. Okay, so there's a certain type of person in sport, right? And you could probably draw a picture of them, right? They're all very, very similar.
Yeah. Well, just to add to that, Neill, what I would just from some research I did myself, you have lots of data-driven individuals within sport. Whether it's within recruitment, coaching, sports science, measuring data metrics. There's some very kind of process driven individuals working within sport.
100%. They're only looking at part of the data set.
Yeah.
But anyway, and then you'll find that in our experience is that the athletes, people running sport, and the people managing sponsorship programs, the people running the sponsorship programs are way ahead of the people running sport. And the athletes, to be honest, when it comes to this topic. And that's because business has been on this for a while. I mean, this topic of conscious capitalism has been around for a while in business. Sport just hasn't been paying attention, right? I mean, there are how many now? 6,000, or I don't know, the number keeps going up every day, but multiple thousand B Corps in the world today, because there's not a single sport B Corp in the world, not one.
Right, and that's great, because it's such an opportunity for somebody to take that first step.
Exactly. I mean, 17 Sports, the first B Corp in sport. Not a single one. And that just shows you where sport is as a discipline or as a field compared to the rest of business. So business is ahead of the curve in terms of its understanding of the issues, understanding what the fans care about, understanding the topics, and understanding how to engage with it. But it'll change. Again, there are more and more people, and especially as we have younger people entering the workforce, they're putting pressure on these properties to change. So that's good.
Well, that kind of brings us around nicely, Neill, because what I was going to say was, again, your book, Legacy Sport, I'll hold it up for anybody who's watching on a video. Many of the case studies in the first part of the book are from the world of business, right? I'm hoping there's going to be a second edition where the case studies are all sport-based at some point in the future. Can you give us some hope that that's going to be the case? Are there some exciting projects right now that you're working on?
Yeah, I'm not sure another book is one of them, Matt. I've written that was
I'll write it. I'll write it for you.
Yeah, well, maybe we should do it together. That was my second book, and I don't know if you've written a book. It's a labor of love. So
yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see. But there's not one plan for the immediate future. yeah, I think my focus right now and Fabian's focus right now is just to do stuff. We don't want to write about it anymore. We want to just do it, and hopefully the results will be what drives people to want to try this stuff and gives them confidence to do it. I think at the end of the day, people just need permission, right? They just need permission to try this stuff, and just to try and do things differently. So I think the next 5 years will be really interesting for sport. I think that when we look back, if we were having this conversation in 5 years' time, and maybe we should make an appointment to do that, just reflect back on how far sport has come. I think sport will rise to the occasion. And I think that we'll be talking about many, we won't just be talking about Formula E and ocean race. We'll be talking about how the IOC has embraced purpose and changed the way that business operates. How FIFA at last kind of woke up to its senses and realize the power that it has to drive change. Those types of conversations. How Rugby World Cup is not just about entertainment, which I think Rugby World Cup's still a bit caught in the past. I think it'll be a positive conversation.
Well, I look forward to that conversation, Neill. Hopefully we don't have to wait 5 years for it.
I hope not to.